Welcome to AP European History with Dr. Brovkin. Today we continue our discussion of Mussolini's Italy. In the last video we discussed the rise of Mussolini to power, creation of his new political party, the Fascists. Today we discuss actually the rule of Mussolini. What exactly was it like? What did this ideology crystallize into, and how different or similar it was from other totalitarian regimes. So as we discussed before, 1922, after the March on Rome, Mussolini becomes prime minister. What exactly did he try to do? It is easy to imagine that he had a plan, that there was some kind of idea that he started to implement. No, nothing of the sort. Mussolini's action was improvisation, as it always a lot of times is, as it was with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had no idea what he's going to do, except that he knew he had to stop unemployment. So this is the same thing, in a sense that Mussolini realizes that there are immediate things that he has to accomplish to dissolve the crisis as he's faced with, which means that he has to consolidate. Is there's any kind of one overarching word for his policies, it would be consolidation and reconciliation. He does want to have peace. Rather than war. He doesn't want class warfare. He wants to unite all Italians into one kind of a coherent whole. And he does that. A lot of it is his speeches. He's actually one of the great orators of his time. And is somewhat different from Hitler. Hitler was, of course, also a fantastic speaker, but Hitler's speeches are full of hatred and excitement, and they're only effective if you're angry. But if you're happy, it's very hard to get excited with Hitler's speeches. What Mussolini does, he works on the positive. When you listen to his speeches, the words that mostly come across is La Patria, l'Italia. And even if you don't know Italian, you look at his body language, you look at his crossed hands, and he speaks from the balcony. And Italians loved coming and speak and listening to him. And with the appearance of radio, his speeches were over and over heard all over Italy. So it is more on a positive side, and there is no hatred. There's absolutely none to Jews, for example. There's none of the negative connotation that his speeches evoke. We're going to be great, we're going to be united, Italy will be growing, it'll be very strong, we're a great nation, etc., etc. These are the kind of main repetitious words that he comes up. Other than words, what exactly does he do? Well, he's trying to bring together various components of Italian society. Peasants, for example, they're poor, so he's trying to help. There are several programs that he initiates to help the peasants, and he himself poses a lot of times, bare-chested, working in the fields, bundling up the grain bundles. And then there is a program of draining the marshes in central Italy. So he does come across as a leader who cares about normal, simple people. He wants to come across as one of them. Well, I cannot imagine Hitler, for example, tying up bundles of hay. It just doesn't go with the character. Neither can be done about Stalin or Franco. I mean, that's the kind of populism that Mussolini is trying to project. He's also initiating a number of reforms that have to do with the church, which is the secularization of the republic. He's kind of rolling it back. And is very pleasing to the Pope and to the Church. So he introduces religious education in the schools. He grants several privileges to the Church. He promotes, church education and publications. He's speaking a lot about Italian family and about women. He tries to promote rights of women, but also at the same time emphasizing conservative values, which means that motherhood and great families, they, of course, there's no abortion, obviously there is none, but is also illegalizes or bans contraceptives and promotes this kind of role of a woman. On the one hand, you do have professional organizations of women. On the other hand, he's trying to promote woman as a mother. And he also is, very clever in some of in his promotional PR campaigns. He's trying to look very masculine, very macho, very strong, without a shirt, and trying to show, kind of a strong Italian man. And it worked. There were a lot of women who were just crazy about Mussolini and loved him. Not the way that with Hitler, who would not, if you can imagine Hitler without a shirt, it would be a very miserable sight. Not so Mussolini. He was strong, he was powerful, he projected that masculinity and that power that went well with his whole ideology. On a more substantive level, what exactly is Mussolini's fascism as a system of government? Well, it is obviously dictatorship, absolutely, there's no question about it. It is a dictatorship, but it is a kind of a benign dictatorship. In other words, if we were to compare his dictatorship with that of his contemporaries, such as General Franco, what immediately you would say, Mussolini didn't shoot people. He didn't line up communists and executed them en masse, something that Franco did. If we compare it to Comrade Stalin, who basically rounded up 1 million people in 1937 and had them shot. And I'm not even talking about anti-collectivization campaign, which was counted in 5 or 6 million. So none of that. Nobody was shot, especially with just secret police grabbing people at night. Yes, there was an assassination of a political leader, which caused a scandal. There was a parliament, but it didn't matter much. It was a dictatorship, but it was a kind of a benign dictatorship where not much, if not to say no, blood was spilled. And in that sense, it could stand way above Hitler or Stalin or Mussolini, Franco, or other dictators of the time. Now, again, aside from the terror, which is a big deal in any study of totalitarianism, there was no anti-Semitism. That's the thing. I mean, this is not to be forgotten. And from that point of view, fascists are very different from National Socialists in Italy. I read a book of a colleague of mine, Professor Pipes, Vixi, it's called, and he describes how they ran away from Nazi Germany in 1939, immediately after the Germans occupied Poland. They were Jews, they left, they managed to come to Italy, and they lived there for several months, anticipating a boat to Spain and then to the United States. And he describes his life in Italy. And one of the episodes is that he says he, as a teenager, went to movies, and he noticed that a lot of workers would come up to the cinema and just wave a card and say "Lavora," and then they would get a free ticket to the movies. So Richard Pipes, threw his card of something and showed "Lavora," and he wound up going free to the movies. What does it show? It shows that the trade unionists, who were created new trade unions, were getting all kinds of perks, among them sports facilities and movies. And that shows that Mussolini cared. Now, of course, it's always people say he disbanded the old trade unions, the socialist trade unions. Yes, of course he did. They were his competition. Competition, is getting disbanded even in the capitalist world. Competition is always destroyed in the capitalist world. So yes, competition trade unions were disbanded, but he did care. He did provide all kinds of perks and facilities to workers who actually were, again, somehow integrated into the Italian society. So basically, it boils down to this whole idea. Mussolini's fascism is a system of corporatist integration. That's what I would call it. Corporatism means that he believed that different segments of society would be corporations. Corporations not in terms of business companies, corporations as segments of society that are together integrated into one coherent whole led by il duce, by the leader. That's his idea, basically. That you have 22 corporations actually, and they are providing stability, which is lacking in the bourgeois republic that he replaced, which indeed was total instability, cabinets changing each other every few months, general strikes, street battles. All that is in the past. In the 1920s, you have corporations, you have the church has its place, trade unions have a place, peasants have their place, businessmen have their place. You have cooperation between business boards of workers and entrepreneurs, an idea that he actually borrowed from the Mensheviks in Russia, who were the first to do this. So in other words, he is trying to integrate Italian society, which was on the brink of a civil war when he came to power. And in a way, it did work. Now, critics, of course, say that it didn't work. Now, it is, of course, an open question. One would say it worked, other people could say it worked. If we measure it in terms of not perfect democracy, in terms of our values of today, but if we measure it against the contemporaries of his time, Spain was a civil war. France was shaken by general strikes and instability until 1936. Britain was going from one crisis after another. Italy under Mussolini was pretty much a beacon of stability. It was not a democracy, one more time. It was a dictatorship. And it was not, of course, anything like a system that you could aspire to. But of all the dictators of the time, it was probably the least offensive. And even if you compare life in Italy in late 20s and early 30s, it probably was better for workers than it was in the so-called capitalist democracies after the crisis and collapse of the markets in 1929. So it is state control of industry. As again, something that he didn't invent. Stalin controlled industry, Hitler controlled industry, Franklin Delano Roosevelt controlled industry, but it is much more so. It's actually an article of belief that it is the role of the state to provide state guidance to industry in a kind of a corporatist system that he created. So, if we apply Hannah Arendt's model in her famous book Totalitarianism, Mussolini's system does fit into that kind of a model. You have the leader, the Führer, or in that case, Il Duce. You have an ideology, which is fascism, which means nationalism, national unity. You have a hero, who leads the nation. You do have that. You have the values that are conservative. You have church, you have a family, you have motherhood, you have enemies, a Feindbild, as it is in German, called the enemy picture. Who are the enemy? The communists, the internationalists, but not the Jews. The Jews are not in the list of the enemies. There is no official anti-Semitism. And a lot of times, Catholic priests would help the Jews to survive at the time of German occupation. There's a class peace as opposed to class war promoted by communists and national unification for the greater good of Italian nation. So that's what Italian fascism is, and it turned out to be a quite simple system. And quite successful one. But let me just provide the counter arguments. There are those historians who argue that all that was just a veneer, that underneath this veneer of unity, Italy did remain poor and ununited, that underneath this prosperity, there was just a show-off, that peasants remained poor in the south, that the mafia controlled the South completely, that the Catholic Church took advantage of its privileged position and remained, a state within a state, that the rich remained rich and even richer, that the gap between the rich and the poor widened All that may be true. All that may be true. And I'm not denying it. But all I'm saying is if we compare it not to the ideal situation, but to what actually was happening in Europe in the 1930s, Italy was not such a bad place to be compared to almost anything. If we compared even to Pilsudski's Poland with its kind of dictatorial nationalistic rule, or Horthy in Hungary, or Antonescu in Romania, or Franco in Spain, and the only place that could be said is better for workers is France under Front Populaire, Popular Front, that came to power in 1936. The rest of Europe is in the hands of dictators of one type or another, and Mussolini is by far not the worst of them. So we will continue with Mussolini because what needs to be explained is his foreign policy that led to his demise, and that we shall do in the next video. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Brovkin, AP European History. Thank you.